Hello, Bible readers. Who gets to go? If God exposes Pharaoh for being the false god Pharaoh really is, if Pharaoh says, "Go, all of you, go worship the Lord," who qualifies to go worship the Lord? Like, do you imagine someone standing at some gates with a phone book or a census list or something and checking off family names? This is not an orderly border crossing where everyone has to show their passport before they're allowed to leave. Is your mother and your father an Israelite? Or did your grandparents come from a whole other nation altogether and get lumped into this slavery class? Israelite seems like a neat, clean category of humans. They probably don't deserve that level of orderliness at this juncture in their history. This is a slavery class of people more than a singular ethnicity. And that's why in verse 38 it says, "A mixed multitude went up with them." Them are the Israelites and others. They are a mixed lot. That's what Exodus is telling us. And this idea that God frees a mixed multitude, this idea is a pivotal moment in Scripture if we're going to try to make sense of who qualifies for following Jesus, who qualifies for being saved, who qualifies for participating in the work and the identity of the church, who gets to be in community with us, the church. Just some people in particular, or a mixed multitude? As Brueggemann says, mixed multitude suggests a sociological awareness that a company of escaping slaves does not enjoy the luxury of a fixed identity or genealogy. In other words, the Exodus was messy. Obviously, there were likely lots of skin colors, lots of languages being spoken, lots of customs among the multitude. That's what mixed means. It's not just a mix of personalities. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 49, it even says, "There shall be one law for the native and for the alien who resides among you." In other words, everybody's under the same law. I mean, just imagine how different that idea is than what Egypt was imposing. Egypt surely had an elaborate system of who got to have power and who got to be oppressed and taken advantage of. Social hierarchy would have served those in power so that their kids could also enjoy power and pleasures. That's how it's always worked. That's how it works in our own world. So for Israel to say that there shall be just one law for natives and foreigners, aliens, that's radical. Everybody was going into a new future without social distinction. That's radical. Brueggemann says the issues are economic. They're all ex-slaves. But because God is the one to intervene and cause this exodus, the matter is theological. This is how economics join theology. And the theo-economic eruption can have no patience with social differentiation. In other words, erupting the socioeconomic ways of the day, we didn't have time to figure out who exactly qualifies to be liberated. Everybody is. A mixed multitude is. Again, as all the slaves escape in haste, nobody's going to stand at the gates and ask for their papers, for their family name, for their tickets. That sounds silly, but that's how societies work. Once a refugee people become a settled people. Once the illusions of security and affluence take hold once again, Israel will be just as guilty as any other nation ever is. Israel, too, will start to make rules. Bible readers, academics, call them holiness codes that seek to exclude people based on not having the right parents or the right religious habits or not living on the right land. And of course, religious merit, being of the right pedigree, living on the right land, doing the right religious things, all of that stuff stays connected with economics. Theoeconomics is not just an ancient thing they did way back then in Exodus. It's a constant debate within Scripture throughout the Old and New Testaments, and it's still something that we fight with now. So if we went on from here, and we will, from Exodus all the way, let's say, into Ezra and Nehemiah, which historically speaking is a ways down the road. Ezra and Nehemiah are all about enforcing holiness codes. As people return from the exile, that's the way that they figure out, well, who gets to come back? Who's going to repopulate our city? Let's make a list and say, well, and then they have a bunch of holiness codes. We should only allow the purest and most Israeli Israelites to reconstitute our capital. But that couldn't be further from the tradition of Exodus's mixed multitudes and its attention that spills into the church. Paul, the Christian church, Paul declares himself an apostle to the Gentiles. Well, that wasn't without controversy. Gentiles are all non-Jews. They are the mixture of multitudes personified. So when the Gentiles are finally allowed, not without controversy, to be included in the unity of the church, Brueggemann says, this is when we come full circle. In that move, the early church returns to the initial impulse of the Exodus narrative that the recipients of God's liberation were defined by nothing more or nothing other than their readiness to move to an alternative existence outside the reach of a predatory regime. It's like, as long as you want out, you qualify. In the time of Jesus, maybe you could say that those seeking escape from the Roman Empire could have been lumped into a mixed multitude without pedigree or genealogy. They could all just share in common that they're all trying to get out from under the thumb of Rome. In our time, it could be the poor who are left behind by the forces of empire. Nobodies who have no power and have no claims on deserving to live out from their economic plight. They'd be the kind of people this God in Exodus would come to save. Brueggemann says, empire depends on nameless nobodies to do the heavy lifting. When these anonymous heavy lifters become a people, they constitute a threat to the empire and a force for an alternative. Christians, I would suggest, I've got a lot to back me up on this, we're called to follow Jesus, who threw his lot in with the nobodies. Which sounds good, but remember, that's what got him killed. My next post, that's one way to end things, huh? My next post will be from Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 to 14, and the chapter is called Fear Outflanked by Holy Reserve. You're going to like this one. Fear outflanked by holy reserve. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.